Hello, I'm Mike Kelly from Project Healing Waters in Omaha, and tonight we're going to cover the pheasant tail nymph. The hook that we'll probably select for this is a 2X long nymph hook. You want the hook to be a little bit longer of a shank, because if you look at the picture that you see in front of you, the abdomen of the fly, or the back part of the fly, covers a little over half of the shank, and then you've got a big thorax, and so there's a lot of material on this fly that covers from the hook eye to the bend of the hook. So we want the hook shank to be a little bit longer on this nymph. So for first thing I'm going to cover is a little bit of a discussion about pheasant tail. And so I'm going to change video to my materials here. So the main material, of course, where it gets its name is pheasant tail. And this is ringneck pheasant. And the center tail of a ringneck pheasant is pretty much equal length of barbules on the left and the right. You pretty much have equal length. As you start getting to the side feathers, here's an example, a little bit less marked, and you can see how this side is, it's mottled. It's kind of a nice looking feather, but it's pale, and it's not as marked as the other side of the feather. So this was probably on, I guess for the pheasant, it would be on the left side, and the other feathers were like covering over it. With pheasant tails, the best selections are usually, they have real long barbules that hang off the side. The rachis is the center stem here, and these are barbules, and the longer ones are better for this type of a fly. But if you have shorter ones, say on this side, those could be used for the tail where you don't use as much, but it shows those tips. But if you need to actually wrap a body like we'll be doing tonight, you want the longer ones. So you can get by with a feather that's not actually in the center of the bird, but those are the better ones to select. I've seen some with really long barbules. Sometimes it's age of the bird, I suppose, that makes them longer. Then with this type of a material, and maybe it's a pet peeve of mine, but I think it makes it easier for the fly tire, is to use the fibers from the bottom up. If you look at this and you see that there's a couple of broken ones in there, just strip those away and take the next ones up. Because if you start clipping some from up here, and then you clip some from up here in the top, you end up with this ragged piece that has a bunch of small sections in there that aren't really usable. So it's better to always use it from the bottom up. So if this was a brand new feather plucked right out of the bird, I'd probably strip maybe an inch off the bottom where it's fuzzy fibers and stuff that's not usable, and get up into the nice clean stuff, and then just use what you need as you go up the feather and just keep working your way up. Another material that the only other feather that's used in this fly is peacock herl. And of course, everybody's familiar with the peacock eye. These are really long. They're probably sometimes 4 or 5 feet long, maybe longer. But these hurls these are called hurls. The ones that are further down the feather toward where it plugs into the bird are they have shorter little fibers coming off of that stem. And the ones that are up here closer to the eye, these are really long, maybe a little brighter color, but these are really long fibers coming off of here. So if I was using this feather for smaller flies, like maybe size 16, 18, I might use these further down the feather. And if I was doing 10s and 12s and larger ones, I'd be using these up here toward closer to the eye. Most of the time, the way the peacock herl is purchased in bulk, basically, is strung peacock herl. And you can see there's a cotton thread there that weaves this together. And you basically get all of these herls off a lot of necks. Probably less quality, but there are some good quality ones in there. And you basically just pluck these out and use them as you go. So that's those two materials. But I want to cover, we're doing a nymph tonight. So I want to kind of cover a little bit about what nymphs are, why they, the life cycle of an insect, and what we're really trying to represent here with the fly. So this graphic that you're looking at, in the upper left, you can see the life cycle of a mayfly. So it starts with a mayfly nymph, and that's basically what this pheasant tail is supposed to represent. Once they get old enough, they emerge. So there's a lot of flies that represent a mayfly emerger. And then probably a lot of people are dry fly purists, but the fly that floats on the water that a lot of people think of with fly fishing is a dry mayfly. And then once the life cycle ends, they fall to the surface and die. Sometimes they fall on the ground, but the ones that fall in the water are useful to fly fishermen, and that's a mayfly spinner. So if you think about it, the two most vulnerable stages of a mayfly's life cycle are going to be the emerger, when they're trying to break out of their nymph shuck and become the adult, and the mayfly spinner, where they fall to the surface and die, and then they can just be sipped off the surface. The stoneflies also have a nymph stage. It's just a lot larger of a nymph, a lot bulkier, a lot wider of a body. Are you seeing my PowerPoint right now?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Or I'm seeing the nymph graphic. Is that what you're talking about?
Right. And then
Yeah, okay.
The stonefly adult is similar. It's similar to the nymph, a lot bigger, and then it has the wings laid back over the back. Caddis and midges are a different type of life cycle. And there's actually a mistake on this graphic that I pulled off the internet, but caddis start off as a larva. Of course, they start off as an egg, but the egg hatches into a larva, which is worm-like or caterpillar-like, and then they evolve into a pupa, and then they become an adult winged insect. They go off and mate, and then they fall to the surface as well. Midge actually are larvae as well, so they're not a nymph. It's actually a midge larva, and then they emerge. It's actually a midge pupa, and then they're a winged insect as the adult. So this is actual photographs of a mayfly. So this is a adult mayfly with the wings up like a similar to a sailboat. They have the long tails that hang off the back. And then the hackle normally represents legs and the part of the wing profile. For stoneflies, again, it's the wings lay back over the back. Caddisfly is more moth-like, and they have sort of a tent wing style over the back. And then this is a picture of a midge. The nymphs, which is what we're dealing with here, these are just different pictures. This is also a pretty commonly represented dry fly, especially in lakes and ponds, is a damselfly. And a dragonfly is in this center top picture. And then this is a crane fly. The nymph version of these are all shown below. So here's a picture of a damsel nymph. And then a dragonfly nymph is a real wide-bodied, pretty nasty looking insect. And then this is a crane fly larva. So that's kind of an overview of the insect life cycles. But what we're going to focus on here, what we're going to cover tonight, is the pheasant tail nymph. And it's got a tail of the tips of the pheasant tail barbules. The body is the pheasant tail fibers that are wrapped around the body with a copper wire rib. And then this is a example of a one with legs. Normally they're not tied with legs. Some people like to do that. Here's more of the style that we'll be doing tonight, which is just a basic pheasant tail nymph. And the thorax area, which is the front section, is peacock curl that's wrapped around with a wing case, which is what this part is called, that wraps over the top. And that's also pheasant tail. So the pheasant tail nymph was originally conceived in 1958 by Frank Sawyer from England. The original was tied with two materials, pheasant tail fibers and very fine copper wire. But then Al Troth of Montana popularized the American version of with a peacock curl thorax. Dave Hughes created a variation called the pheasant tail flashback, which added a wing case of pearl tinsel. Got some here. If I can pull it out real quick, I'll show it to you. So this pearl tinsel, you can see it in the background there. It's pearl mirage. There's different names for it, but this wrapped over the top of the wing case gives it kind of a little bit of a flash, and that's a pretty popular fly nowadays with the flashback pheasant tail, basically. So let's see. Go back to the pattern sheet real quick here. And so again, we're tying this on a 2x long nymph hook, and that just gives us a little bit longer hook shank for the body. These can be tied from a size 8 to 22. You probably be tied smaller, but if you get much smaller than a 22, the materials are just too big for the size of a hook to make it look realistic. The thread I'm going to use a black. You can use black or brown. The tail is the pheasant tail fibers. Rib is copper wire. The abdomen is pheasant tail fibers. And I'll show you a trick with that to make it last longer. And then the thorax is peacock herl with a wing case of pheasant tail fibers. So let me switch to the Vice camera. So I'm going to cover this step by step. And then if we have anybody tie in tonight, I'll cover this and explain all of the steps and why I'm doing them. And then if we have anybody tie in tonight, then we'll go step by step for that.
Yeah, Mike, Tom's gonna be tying tonight, so.
Okay, okay. So again, first I'll just cover how I'm tying it and why I'm doing each step. I can't see that with my naked eye, but I can see it on the camera. So, all right, we got a clean hook now. So the first thing I'm going to do is put my thread on. I'm using a larger hook. I believe this is a size 8. Yes, size 8. And I'm doing that just so it looks better on the camera. But best way to tie flies is not done in 1/4 inch length or half-inch length. It's done by proportions based on the length of the hook. So if you're tying this in a size 18, you would use a certain measurement on the hook. If you're tying it in a size 8, it'd be the same measurement on the hook, but with a larger hook, it's larger proportions. So anyway, I'm going to start the thread about an eye length back and wrap back over the thread. Again, keeping my tag into my thread at a 90-degree angle, so that helps me make a nice smooth thread base. And then I'll go back to the end of the shank, which is right where the barb is. Now I'm going to select from this piece of a pheasant tail. For the tail, I want about probably no more than 4 or 5 fibers. A mayfly has 2 to 3 tails, but this is more, for one thing, pheasant tail is a brittle, kind of a sensitive material, but also this is just like a representation and more for balance and the overall look. You don't want.
You're out of focus, Mike.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
There you go.
I want this to be maybe about 2/3 of the length of the shank. I'm just kind of holding it up to the eye right there and measuring where I want my tail. And I'm putting the materials on the side of the hook closest to me. And then as I wrap over, that's going to put them on top. I'm going to take one wrap over, take a wrap under, and take one more wrap over. That's really going to lock that in there without causing a lot of bulk. Now, for the rib material, I'm going to use some copper wire. This is brassy size because I'm using a size 8 hook. If you're using a much smaller hook, you need to just adjust the wire accordingly. So basically I'm going to pull some off of here. And then these spools come with a little rubber insert right there. So you can pull off a length, maybe about 5 or 6 inches. And then just pinch it back underneath that rubber cap. And that'll hold it in place. And then this stuff is brittle enough to where you can hold it with your thumbnail and just break it away. So I'll hold that back. You know what? I'm going to back up here. Before I tie in that tail, I think it would be better to tie in the rib material. Because with that tail, you don't want to jostle the tail with tying in the wire. So if we go back to the beginning, I laid down a thread base, and then I'm going to tie in the copper wire that's going to be used for the rib. I want that to be on the back side here from me, so that it's out of the way. Then I'm going to take that pheasant tail material, about 5 or 6 fibers, about 2/3 of the hook shank length, and go back to the bend. I'm going to tie that in so that my tail comes out about 1/3 of the shank in length, right on top of the shank. And then I'm going to fold back, and I'm going to go up here to about right there. It's about between 1/3 and 1/2 of the hook shank. That'll give me room to put my thorax in the front. So now I'm going to take that pheasant tail butts, and I'm going to wrap them towards me underneath. So this is the reverse of how you would normally tie in materials. I'm going to reverse wrap these because these are the weaker material. As you see, one of them just broke. I have it in my other hand right here. I'm going to keep wrapping these forward, touching turns, until I get up to my thread. And then I'm going to wrap over them. Wrap over them again. One underneath and one over. And then I'll cut those off. So that's going to be my body. If you can see, the good thing about pheasant tail is there's actually little hairs that hang off, that come off of there. And that represents the little gills and parts that hang off the side of it. I'm going to take this copper wire now and wrap in the normal direction, which is going to counter wrap pheasant tail. I'm actually going to go a little bit farther into the thorax area. That's going to give me a little bit of weight, but it'll also make sure that that wire is tied in really well. Wrap over that a few times. And then you'll excuse me bumping the camera. Take that wire and just kind of, they call this helicoptering. Hold the thread tight and just spin that around. And what that does is it breaks that wire at a blunt end. If you were to go in there with the back of your scissors here and cut that, you could do that. You don't never want to use the tips for wire. You want to use the back end of the scissors to cut it. But when you do that, a lot of times it will make a real sharp edge, and that can cut your thread. So now we have the tail. We have the body that was wrapped towards me, and then the copper wire was wrapped away from me, which counter-wrapped that pheasant. The next step is to take another section of this pheasant tail. And you don't have to use the real long stuff that I would use for the body. Zoom in a little bit on that feather. Just have to remember to go back. So this stuff is real long on this feather, and I would use that for wrapping bodies. This stuff is a little bit shorter. So I could maybe use that for the wing case, because I'm not as concerned about length. So I'm going to take, this looks like it's about 10 or 12 fibers, and pull them loose from the rachis.
9 or 5, right?
9 or 5. Closer to 9. Now, you can see all those curly bits where I tore that away from the rachis. I'm just going to cut those off. And I'm going to use that instead of tying it in by the tips. I'm going to tie it in by those blunt ends. And again, I put it on the side of the hook towards me a little bit. And then as I wrap over it, that pulls that onto the top. Now I want to make sure, as I hold that wing case up, I want to make sure that I've got enough room up here to wrap that peacock herl and fold that over the top and have that be just a little bit less than half of what this abdomen section is. So the thorax would be from here to here. So now I need to select a peacock herl. And again, because I'm using such a large hook, I'm using a size 8, so it'll show up good on the camera. I'm going to use a bigger peacock herl from closer to the eye. I'm going to cut off about a 1/2 inch at the base of it. Now, if you look at this peacock herl, there's a pretty side right there. And then on the other side, there's a stem, and it's a lot duller. It's not as shiny. Ideally, you want this dull side to be toward the front as you tie this in. And then we'll go back to towards the eye of the hook, right about there. Actually, I'm not going to do that. We'll cover this as we do the step by step. I'm going to leave my thread hanging right here because as I've been watching Al Beatty and his wife tying renegades, I was reminded of the trick where you wrap the peacock herl. As you notice, I'm leaving the thread right up against that peacock herl. So as I wrap that forward, the thread is pulling that peacock herl against the wrap before it. So you get real tight turns and a nice dense thorax there. You can see how that's making a real dense thorax. Now I'm going to wrap that about 3 wraps. And then I'll cut that loose. And then we take the thorax and fold it over the top. You want to get that nice and pulled together. So if you look at it from the top here, you want to make sure it's evenly coming over the top. Take a couple wraps and then pull that real tight. Make another wrap. Fold them back. Make a few wraps in front. And then we'll cut that loose. Now to finish this fly, you just build up a little bit of a head here. And then either whip finish like that, or use a half hitch tool. And you can do a half hitch. And then a couple, I guess it would be a hitch if it's a double half hitch. And that'll tie off your head. And that's an American pheasant tail knit. We'll do a little bit of head cement. Even though I did a double whip finish, probably don't need head cement. And there's a finished fly. Well, now if Tom's ready.
He's just finishing up, Mike. Here,
Okay.
He was tying along with it this time, so now you can show him how to do it for real.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments on that?
Mike, have you ever spun your peacock curl around your thread to add strength to that peacock curl?
Yes, for a peacock curl body, fly like a, I'll do that real quick while Tom's finishing.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you're done, Tom?
Yeah, whenever you, go ahead, whatever you're doing.
All right, I'm just gonna cover this for David real quick.
Yep, please do.
So I tied the tied my thread on, and then I just tied a piece of peacock curl there. And I'll do this a lot on a fly like, say, a zug bug, which we'll be doing on, I believe that's fly 5 or maybe the next one. I'm not sure. Excuse me for bumping the camera. But I'll take that peacock curl, and once it's where I want the end of the body to be, I'll wrap it. So I'm coming around the back here towards me. I guess if you were looking down on the fly, it would be turning this clockwise. Wrap it a few times toward the top there. And if you do this with two, say 2 hackles, 2 of these peacock curls, it's maybe a little denser. But if you spin, now I spun my bobbin and I'm twisting the thread. And so you can see that kind of makes it like a chenille peacock curl. And so as you wrap it forward, that peacock curl is wrapped over by the thread. And it really makes it a very strong,
But he's a great guy.
very strong body. So if this was to get nicked by a fish's tooth,
His wife's name is Mary, isn't it?
I'm gonna
You know him?
bang it with my scissors a little bit, maybe even
Mary. That's so sad. Yeah,
kind of clip at it like that.
spent all that time working.
Peacock curl isn't going anywhere. You might get an end to come out like that,
It's like,
but it's really gonna make it secure. So it's basically a way of making a peacock chenille using the tying thread.
Do you think on a pheasant tail nymph it would bulk up that collar too much?
No, actually, I like the thorax. I like the thorax to be a little bit bulky.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily a bad idea. To me, this is kind of a, maybe a advanced tip trick kind of thing. And so, you know, the purpose of this was mainly for teaching just the basic pheasant tail nymph, you know, to a beginner, and not so much a tips and tricks kind of thing for later on.
Okay, thank you.
That's definitely a good idea. I do it for definitely for longer bodies. Like again, like a Zug bug or a Prince nymph, if I'm doing a longer body with peacock curl, I'll definitely reinforce it like that. But for a short thorax like that, again, that short of a thorax, it's covered by the
That'll work. Yeah. That'll work. Not bad.
by the
I'll bring this whole thorax
wing case as well,
forward more. Yeah.
right there.
Well,
So if this was to get nicked with a tooth, you might have some of them hanging down,
this is an extra long. hook.
but that'd kind of keep it from completely unraveling.
You probably want it within the head.
That's definitely a good
Yeah.
point, though.
Thorax. All
All right, I'll hang this out of the way and we'll go step by step. If Tom's ready.
Yeah, I got the thread already wound up on mine, so
Oh, boy, you overachiever, you.
well, I try. I mean,
Mike, is that a 1X long hook or a 2X?
That's 2X.
2X.
That's another reason I used a size 8. The only 2X I could find quickly tonight was size 8.
Pull that hook out of your vise.
So
Try this one again.
yeah,
Yeah, try that one right there. Is that the same size as this one? I think it's a little shorter. Yeah. That looks like a 2X, about a 10.
hopefully you guys could hear me good. I had my mic clipped to the laptop.
Yeah, we can hear you fine, Mike.
hearing and seeing you are two different things.
Yeah, you're gonna hear me better now because I have it clipped to my shirt.
Oh, yeah, see, that's the problem we ran into last week.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So first thing I'm gonna do is start the thread, which Tom has already done. And then I'm gonna take do you have copper wire? I'm gonna take my copper wire and I'm gonna allow the thread tension to push that around the hook so that it's opposite me, preferably toward the lower side of the hook. You can see that.
Yep.
And the reason for that is as I wrap around the hook like this, I don't want to interfere with the tail. If I had this on the front and I started to wrap this way, it would grab the tail and it would twist it and cause it to be less pretty. All right.
Yep.
So for the tail, I'm just going to select some pheasant tail fibers about not 9 or 5, closer to 5. And I'm going to strip them away from the rachis. And if you hold them out at about a 90-degree angle, I'll do this again. If you pull them out like this at about a 90-degree angle, all the tips are lined up evenly. Like that.
Yep.
And then, I don't know why, but they say if you pull the feather away from the fibers, you're less likely to get those tips uneven than if you just pull the tips away from the rachis. So I'm going to pull the feather away from those. And you can see I just have those butts right there.
Yep.
So gather them together in your fingers. And then I've got that copper wire hanging off the back here, so it's not in my way.
Right.
I'm going to measure this against the hook shank. I don't want it to be a full hook shank in length. I want it to be less than that. For a pheasant tail, I want it to be about right here. So about 2/3 of the hook shank.
I got 7 so far.
And then I'm going to take one wrap and make sure that's on top of the hook. Maybe a second wrap right over the top of that.
No, unwrap that. The other way.
Well, the camera really shows a lot of stuff I don't see.
Yeah, that's what you did wrong. They had it oriented with the tail to the head. Okay, so grab this with your left hand, right there. Okay, now go ahead and tie it in. Don't let go with that tail. There you go. Now you can let go with the tail.
You want me to go through that again?
Nope. Now he had the tail backwards, Mike. He was holding
Okay.
the tail toward the eye of the hook instead of toward the.
Right.
back.
Right.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay, just make a couple wraps over that. You see, I don't have very many thread wraps there.
Right.
Then lift it up and make a thread wrap underneath. And then start to move towards the front part of the hook.
Hold it just a second here.
I must have nicked my thread in there.
Yeah, you're gonna see, well, you should have done, you should have tied that tail in right there.
Oh, okay, back one.
Yeah, and put 2 wraps around it there and then fold it up and wrap it forward. This will work. This will work.
So the problem is if I was to make too many wraps over that, if I was to make too many wraps over that and come too far forward, I'll do it wrong. If I was to come too far forward like this, then as I start to wrap my pheasant tail around, it's not gonna have, enough to cover it.
What's what we can do here? Hold on just a second,
Oh,
Mike. I'm
all
trying
right.
to do something here. I can do this might work, it might not work. I don't know. What you can do. See that? Oh. Hold it right out of there, bigger than you know what.
2 good wraps over it, another wrap under it, and then a wrap over it is a good way to trap that. And then you can go forward.
There, now we start going forward, okay?
Okay, gotcha.
The trick is to, when you wrap your thread back to the back, toward the back of the hook, when you tie your tail in, tie it right over the top of those ending wraps.
Oh, okay,
On the thread base. Okay,
gotcha.
Now,
Now cover.
you want to take these pheasant, a lot of people will twist them, but it looks better if you can just let them be the way they are.
Play natural.
it's just like you did on the.
And just wrap them, just start wrapping them forward a little bit forward. And if you have a little trouble with the length of it, you can hold it with this finger, hold it with another finger from your left hand, and then fold it under, wrap it around, and then hold it there. That keeps you from losing control of it.
Mike, the other thing I've done sometimes too is if I've got some really short fibers and I haven't got enough, I'll tie in another length of pheasant
Right,
and finish the body that way too, so.
right. So I just kind of hold it with my finger and then you can just even push it around a little bit.
He's running a little short there too, so yeah. So,
So once you get them forward, just take a wrap over it, another wrap before you let go. And there you have it. Now you can just cut those ends.
just got those fibers.
Now this section in here, you don't have to worry about it being pretty because this is going to be covered up with thorax. So a lot of times I'll even wrap it a little bit further forward into this thorax area because it gives me a little bit of bulk there. So when I put that wing case on, there's a little bit wider of an area here, and it just makes the wing case turn out better.
Well, I'll
So-
tell you, Mike, when Kelly Gallup looks at this, he's gonna be on the phone to you, talking to you about not worried about pretty.
Yeah,
He's a real stickler when it comes to that.
Right. And the key is, and I've heard this from lots of people, is when you teach somebody to tie flies, you're not necessarily teaching them to win a contest.
Yeah.
But if you teach them how to make it look perfect, then like an example with Al and Gretchen, they talk about some of the flies that they tie. If they don't turn out exactly right, they don't give them to the customer. Those go in their fly box.
Yeah.
They're commercial tires. For me, I tie them for myself for the most part. If you have two really nice flies and some ugly ones in your fly box, you're going to use the really nice ones first, and you may not even ever go to those ugly ones. It's
Yeah.
going to bother you, and you're going to,
Yeah.
So if you strive to do it right, you don't have to be too critical of yourself, especially when you're first learning. But if you learn it the right way and you strive for the right way, you're always going to improve. If you just kind of consider it a good enough kind of thing, good enough for government work, then you're not as likely to improve as you go along.
Absolutely.
If you do that, we're all veterans.
Right. Good enough for government work. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
So are we at this point yet?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
You're good.
So now we wrap the pheasant tail towards us, and that's not 100% critical, but it just makes for a stronger fly, because now as we wrap this copper wire in spaced wraps, you're wrapping over those reversed wrapped pheasant tail fibers. And now when you get up in the thorax here, you can go a few extra wraps. My copper wire is getting pretty short, so I'm not going to be able to use it for another fly, so I'll just use up some of it there. See how I have a few extra ones, and I'll just come back over those right here.
See, his body's only about half the length of the fly. Yeah.
So then I'm just going to take this and twist it around, and then that broke loose. I think Davey McPhail calls it no, not Davey. Somebody else calls it worrying it off.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that.
Or fretting it off, I've heard.
Yeah.
But you just twist it and bend it until it breaks loose, and then that's a blunt end and it won't cut your tying thread. So let me know when you're at that point.
I'm at that point.
Okay, now we need, if you have an uneven pheasant tail, you can grab it from the shorter side because you don't need the length this time.
With the wing case.
If I was deciding between 9 or 5, I would do closer to 9.
Mike, might want to tell Tom where that 9 or 5 comes from.
That's from a very famous, highly renowned fly tyer from Australia.
Oh, the one in the blue shirt?
Yeah, named Paul Fidelis.
Good job, Paul.
Yeah. Now, so I pulled those away from about, 8, 9, 10 fibers, pulled them away from the rachis. And now I'm using the butt ends. So where the curly stuff was, I cut those off. So the tips are right here. I'm using the thicker end.
Okay.
Because I want my wing case to be a little bit thicker. So I'm going to hold this stuff on the side of the hook towards me. And as I wrap and start getting tight, that's going to wrap it on top of the hook shank.
Yeah, roll it around the hook. Yep.
So right there is about my proportions. I want about a little over 1/3 for my thorax, and that's where my
Okay.
wing case is.
Okay.
And you're there?
Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna grab a piece of peacock herl. And I broke it in half. So I'm gonna grab a different one. There we go. Are you using an eye or a
No, we're using strong.
strong?
Yeah.
So if you can just try to look at the feather and see if you can see the side that has a pronounced stem, like there I can see the brown stem sticking out. It's not 100% critical, but it makes it a little bit fluffier of a thorax. If
Okay.
you can try to get that stem toward you and toward the front of the fly.
Okay.
Okay. And then do some tight wraps over it, go right back to your thorax. And then you can come forward up to the eye. Let your thread hang there.
Okay, with you.
You're not with me, you're in Bellevue.
Well, that's where you should be. I don't know.
I know. Oh, again, you can just wrap this if you want, but if you want to bring that back to where the peacock is hanging, bring your thread back to that point.
Okay.
I used to do this a long time ago, but then Hal and Gretchen really emphasized it. I think it was Dutch Bachman did a fly or talked to them about this process where you wrap the peacock herl, and with a little bit of tension, it lifts the thread up like that. But when you do that, it presses each wrap up against the one before it.
Right.
So you end up with a lot fuller of a
Yeah, it just makes it.
thorax.
Yeah.
Now, if I was to do what David was talking about with the reinforced, kind of making it like a chenille, you could do that for this and it would be stronger, but you probably won't get this fluffy and full of a thorax. I'll wrap over that a few good times. If you've done 4 or 5 wraps, you can be brave and just pull that loose. Otherwise, you can cut it with your scissors.
Just air fiber. There you go. Cool. Yep.
We're good to go?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, take your wing case and just kind of try to pull it flat over the top. I guess if you could twist it like that, but you just want to kind of pull it over flat for the wing case. So you see most of my fibers are kind of in line there toward the eye.
Yeah, okay. Hold it.
Um,
There. Now what you want to do.
and then if you hold those, nice and tight,
Yeah. Hold it.
and then wrap over it with a couple of loose wraps first,
Yeah,
just to make sure everything's gathered.
pretty good. Yeah, more fiber movement there. That's okay.
Right. Then you can fold these up past the eye and do a couple wraps in front, couple wraps over, and then you can cut that out of the way. So as you build the head, you can kind of try to kill any stubs that stick up a little bit.
Davey McPhail does it a way I've never seen it done before, Mike. He, after he gets done wrapping the body, he brings that, he's got enough fibers left, he can bring it forward. And then he puts the thorax right over the top of that and then folds the wing case back from the front to the back and ties it down in the back of the thorax.
Right. I did that when I did the Sawyer
Yeah.
version with
Yeah,
the copper wire.
yeah,
So you wrap over it with the copper wire, and so you don't have the peacock curl here. It's
no,
just copper wire under there. And so you wrap that forward, bring the wing case over, wrap it forward. I mean, you can just kind of go back, and it goes back and forth a couple of times to really sandwich that in. But you
Yeah.
end up tying it off back here with the copper wire
yeah.
and a couple of half hitches.
I thought that was kind of a novel way. I've never seen a wing case tied quite like that before. Did you ever think about putting any UV on the case, on the wing case?
Now, I guess now that we're done, there's some keys with, although this fly has lasted, 100 years, in various forms. Peacock curl is very delicate. It can be broken easily. Pheasant tail is very delicate. It can be broken easily. A lot of people will do a pheasant tail nymph with coq de leon or some kind of fibers that are a little bit more strong for the tail.
Makeup brush fibers.
Right, paintbrush fibers, badger hair, different different kinds of fur,
Yeah.
squirrel tail.
It never, when you sit down to tie, never tie.
And for the thorax, there's other materials that are maybe a little bit stronger.
Oh.
But if you put a little bit of head cement on there, over the wing case, just a little bit of Sally Hansen's, some on the head and a little bit over the wing case, and let that dry. That wing case is less likely to break. Plus, that'll kind of soak in a little bit and support that peacock curl as well. You just don't want to get too much glue into the, you want that peacock curl to be able to move. And you want the pheasant tail, those little hairs hanging off of there to be nice and you don't want them to be glued down or anything. And then, so this is the Sawyer version.
Yeah,
And it looks a little uglier, but I'll tell you, a mayfly nymph doesn't look very pretty. It really doesn't. When you look at it in the water, it's when you take it out of the water, it's just, the legs are all stuck to the sides. It doesn't have legs that are noticeable. And the Sawyer version didn't have legs. It just, wrapped down like that with a little bit of a tail. Copper wire for a rib. The thorax, if you can see underneath, you tie in the thorax, wrap your wire forward, and then tie down the thorax, and then cross your wire back and fold the thorax back over, and then wrap over it with wire here at the in back of the wing case. And so I usually do a few wraps back there to make sure it doesn't come loose. A couple half hitches. This is probably the way I do them most often now. It's a little more difficult because what you need to be able to do is make sure that the length, when you tie in your wing case, that when you fold it forward and wrap it down, you can fold the tips back and use those for legs.
oh, yeah.
So there's a way to measure that from the eye of the hook back to the tail, and then move that back, wrap it down, and then as you fold it forward and fold it under, it's going to be the right length. But I didn't want to do that for a beginner's class. This is just things you can do later on to dress them up a little bit.
I've also seen it tied with legs that are hackled along the side. You know what I'm saying, Mike? Kind of like a
Right. You-
Oh, shoot.
You can take a,
Yeah.
you can take a soft hackle feather
Yeah,
and get like a few. I wish I had something in my junk drawer here, my junk bin. I'm trying to look for a piece of soft hackle, but I don't have something. But you basically have some. You take a soft hackle feather that's usually rounded, and cut a notch in it. So here's a soft hackle tip right here. Take the tip out of that. Take the tip section out of that and cut it. So then what you end up with is a V of some fibers hanging off that kind of look like legs. And then you can set that forward on the fly like that and tie them down. This, of course, there's a V notch taken out of the top of this. So you would just have some legs hanging off the sides. It's another way to do legs.
yeah.
But yeah, John, that's a really good way of doing legs.
Have you found the leg version more effective than the unlegged version, or are they both about the same?
Well, I'm not a fish,
Yeah,
and I've never interviewed a fish. I'll tell you, like I said, in the water, as those things are floating along and they're tumbling,
in schools.
they're tumbling in the stream, and whether or not they have legs is probably kind of a moot point. But I will say that anything that can move on a fly is going to be an advantage. You know, they always talk about a fly being buggy. Anything like a hare's ear, I believe we're doing in one of our beginner classes.
Yeah.
One of the things about a hare's ear is it has guard hairs from a hare's mask, from a rabbit face, that stick out to the sides and kind of look like legs.
Yeah.
It just gives it a buggy appearance. If you really look at a nymph in the water, you'll see like a slender body. The tail gives it a little bit of flair, but for the most part, those legs fold against the side of the body and they don't really show that much.
Yeah.
Just to me, if that or this, maybe this version might give it a little bit more movement in the water, I'm gonna
Yeah.
use this one. So that's what we got.
Cool. Nice job.
Thanks a lot, Mike. I have to go.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Good to see you.
See you next week.
See you
Yep.
next week.
I don't know.
Bye.
Semper Fi.
Semper Fly, yeah.